Minecraft Hardcore mode was supposed to be the hardest way to play the game. You get one life, and if you make one mistake, your entire world is gone forever. When Mojang first introduced Hardcore mode, it completely changed how players approached the game, because suddenly every decision mattered. Every cave was very dangerous, and every fight could be your last one. And honestly, one bad mistake could erase hours of progress instantly. At the time, that rule felt pretty brutal, because players weren't nearly as experienced as they are today. But if you look at Hardcore mode now, something feels completely different. There are players with worlds who have lasted tens of thousands of days. Players will build entire cities, or they will drain oceans, or remove mountains. They will create projects that take hundreds of hours, and somehow they almost never die. So what happened? How did a mode designed to be brutally difficult slowly turn into something that players treat almost like normal survival? To answer that, we need to go all the way back to the early days of Minecraft, because the story of Hardcore mode is really the story of how players slowly mastered the game itself. Hardcore mode was introduced during Minecraft's early development, and at the time the game was still evolving pretty rapidly. There were new features added almost every update, and Mojang was experimenting with ways to make survival more interesting. And for players who wanted a real challenge in Minecraft, Hardcore mode was the answer that Mojang came up with. The concept was very simple. The difficulty was locked to hard mode, and if the player died, the world would be permanently locked. You could still open the world in spectator mode to look around, but the actual playthrough was over. This rule completely changed the way people played the game, because for the first time, survival actually had consequences. If you made a mistake, you could not respawn, and your entire world was practically gone. And back then, Minecraft survival was much harder than it is today, and players didn't know the safest strategies. Combat was way less understood, and even simple mistakes could easily end the world. Creepers were terrifying, and skeletons back then could destroy you at range. And, well, lava as well, I guess. And because of that, Hardcore mode quickly became known as the ultimate challenge. But the way players approached that challenge was about to change, and the reason was actually because of YouTube. As Minecraft started growing on YouTube, Hardcore became a very natural fit for content. The main reason is that it adds stakes to everything. In the normal survival series, dying doesn't really change much, but in Hardcore, dying ends the entire series. So every episode had this underlying tension, even if nothing big was happening. A lot of early Hardcore series followed a similar pattern. The player would start a world, make some progress, maybe get a base set up, and then at some point something would go wrong and the series would just end. And those endings were usually very quick. It wasn't always some huge dramatic moment, sometimes it was just a small mistake that escalated, like walking into a cave without being prepared, or getting cornered by mobs, or just not noticing something behind you. That unpredictability is what made Hardcore very interesting to watch at the time. You never really knew how long a world was going to last. Even if a player was doing well, there was always a chance that it could end very suddenly. At the same time, people watching these videos were learning from them. They were seeing what caused deaths, what situations were dangerous, and what players could have done differently. And over time, that learning started to have an effect. As more people spend time playing Minecraft, the game didn't just become easier, it became understood in a way it wasn't before. Early on, a lot of situations felt random to players. You'd go into a cave and suddenly get overwhelmed, or you'd take damage and not understand what you did wrong. But over time, people started realizing that almost everything in Minecraft follows patterns. Mobs don't just move randomly, they have specific behaviors. Skeletons try to keep distance and line up shots, while zombies walk directly towards you. And creepers didn't explode instantly. They have a delay that you can play around if you're paying attention. And once players started recognizing those patterns, fights stopped being chaotic and started becoming predictable. Instead of getting surprised by a skeleton and backing up while taking damage, players learned to control spacing, either closing the distance quickly or using a shield to block incoming arrows. Instead of panicking when a creeper gets close, players learned the exact range where it becomes dangerous and how to reset it safely. And this sounds simple now, But that shift from reacting to controlling is what made a huge difference in hardcore. Because reacting means you're already in a bad situation, and controlling means you never let it become one. You can see this really clearly in caves. Before, caves were one of the most dangerous parts of the game, because players would just move through them without much structure. You'd place a few torches, maybe miss a spot, and mobs would keep spawning behind you without you realizing it. Now players treat caves almost like a system. They light everything up in a specific way, making sure that there are no gaps. They block off areas they haven't explored yet so they can path towards them. And they move slowly and deliberately instead of just walking forward and hoping nothing shows up. Even something as small as placing torches changed. Early players would kind of just drop them wherever. Now people understood spawn mechanics well enough to know exactly how far apart they needed to be, how light levels worked, and how to completely eliminate the chance of something spawning nearby. So instead of caves being unpredictable, they became controlled environments. And that same pattern applies to almost everything else in the game. Take movement, for example. Early on, a lot of deaths came from things that had nothing to do with mobs. Falling from heights, misjudging jumps, walking into lava, stuff that feels super basic now, but wasn't second nature back then. Over time, players got way better at reading the terrain. They started recognizing risky areas before they became a problem. If there's a drop, you don't just walk near the edge. You either block it off or bridge safely or avoid it entirely. If there's lava, you don't just mine next to it. You create space, you control the area. You make sure there's no way to fall in. Even small habits started to matter. Keeping your health high, making sure you always have food, not taking any unnecessary damage. These things became automatic for experienced players. And that consistency adds up, because hardcore isn't usually lost to one massive mistake. It's lost to a bunch of small ones stacking together. Taking a little damage here, getting caught off guard there, not being fully prepared for something, and eventually it reaches a point where you cannot recover. So when players started eliminating those small mistakes, they stopped losing worlds to those situations entirely. And then there's combat, which probably improved the most out of everything. Early combat was messy, to say the least. Players would spam attacks, mistime hits, and let mobs control the fight. But over time, people started understanding things like timing, reach, and positioning. They learned how to keep enemies at a distance where they can hit them without getting hit back. They learned how to use shields effectively instead of just holding them randomly. They learned how to separate mobs instead of fighting multiple at once. And once you reach that level of control, most fights in Minecraft stop being dangerous at all. And not because mobs are weak, but because you're not giving them opportunities to do any damage. Speedrunning pushed this even further. Even though speedrunning is a completely different goal, it forced players to break the game down into systems and optimize everything. Movement, combat, resource gathering, everything had to be efficient and repeatable. And that mindset carried over into hardcore. Players started thinking less like, I hope this works, and more like, this is the safest and most consistent way to do this. So instead of taking fights they didn't need to take, they avoided them. Instead of exploring randomly, they moved with purpose. And instead of reacting to danger, they prevented it from happening. And that's really the key difference. Hardcore didn't become less dangerous. Players just got better at avoiding danger entirely. So by the time you reach this point in Minecraft's evolution, something important has changed. Hardcore stops feeling unpredictable. You're not constantly worried about something randomly ending your world. You understand the systems well enough to know what's safe, what's risky, and how to stay in control. But at the same time, the risk is still there. It's just quieter. It's not in every moment anymore. It's in the moments where you stop paying attention, or where you get too comfortable, or where you decide to take a risk you normally wouldn't. And that shift from constant danger to controlled risk is what sets up everything that comes after this. As players got more consistent, hardcore didn't just change in how it was played, it changed in how it was presented. Earlier hardcore content was usually a series. You'd get episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, and so on. And the world would either continue or end depending on what happened. That format worked, but it had one big limitation. It depended on time. If you wanted to see a world progress, you had to wait. And if the world ended early, the series just stopped. That's where the 100 days format completely changed things, especially with creators like Luke the Notable, who actually came up with the idea. Instead of stretching progress across multiple uploads, everything was condensed into one video. You'd see the beginning of the world, the early struggles, the mid-game progression, and the end result all in one continuous experience. And that compression did something really important. It made progression feel faster, but more importantly, it made it easier to compare different worlds. Because now, instead of asking, how long did this series last? Viewers were asking, what did you accomplish in the 100 days? And that is a completely different focus. Survival stopped being the main goal and started becoming the expectation. If you couldn't make it to 100 days, that felt like an early ending. And once players consistently reached that point, the question shifted to what happens after. And you can see this in how those videos are structured. The first part is almost always the same. Gather resources, get basic gear, find a safe area, establish some kind of base. It's efficient, it's planned, and it's focused on getting to stability as quickly as possible. But once that stability is there, the pacing changes. Players start taking on bigger goals, expanding their base, building farms, exploring more dangerous areas, but doing it in a controlled way. And because that entire video is condensed, those later stages got a lot more attention. Viewers aren't just watching someone survive, they're watching them build something. That shift matters because it changes how people approach the game, even when they're not making videos. Instead of thinking, I just need to survive, players start thinking, I need to survive so I can start doing something bigger. And over time, that mindset becomes the standard. Once players reached a point where they could survive consistently, the next step wasn't just getting better, it was making survival as safe as possible. And the most effective way to do that was automation. Minecraft has always allowed players to create systems that generate resources, but early on, most players didn't take full advantage of that. They would still gather resources manually, which meant consistently putting themselves in situations where things could go wrong. Mining for iron, exploring for food, fighting mobs for drops, every one of those actions comes with a risk. But as the game became more understood, players started replacing those actions with systems. Instead of mining for iron, you would just build an iron farm. Instead of hunting for food, you'd build an automatic crop farm or animal farm. And instead of exploring for resources, you could create controlled ways to generate them. And the impact of that is huge, because every time you don't have to leave your base, you're removing a chance to die. You're not dealing with random terrain, you're not getting surprised by mobs, you're not putting yourself in unpredictable situations. Everything is happening in an environment you designed. Villager trading is probably the clearest example of how far this goes. Once players figured out how powerful it is, it completely changed progression. Instead of exploring caves or structures to find good gear, you could just trade for it. Fully enchanted armor, tools, weapons, you can get all of that in a safe and controlled space. And because villagers can be reset and optimized, you can get exactly what you want without relying on randomness. So instead of taking risks to get stronger, players started getting stronger so they wouldn't have to take risks. And when you combine that with the farms, you end up with a world where almost everything you need comes to you instead of you going out to get it. And at that point, hardcore stops being about surviving in the world. It starts being about controlling it. But that creates a new problem. If survival is mostly handled, what's left to do? Once survival becomes consistent and resources become automated, players start running into something unexpected, a lack of direction. Because originally, hardcore gives you a very clear goal, stay alive. But once staying alive isn't that difficult anymore, that goal stops being enough on its own. So players just started creating their own goals. And that's where hardcore shifts into being project-based. Instead of focusing on short-term survival, players start focusing on long-term builds. Things that take a lot of time, planning, and effort to complete. You start seeing players build entire cities, massive storage systems, and huge farms that just go way beyond what's necessary. And projects that exist purely because they can. And these are not quick builds. Some of these projects take dozens of hours, some even take hundreds, which I would very much know about, because I have a pretty good hardcore series myself, which you should definitely go check out. I'll leave a link in the description for you. But anyways, this introduces a completely different kind of challenge. It's not about surviving a dangerous moment, it's kind of about maintaining consistency over a long period of time, because the longer you play in a hardcore world, the more chances there are for something to go wrong. Even if each individual action is safe, the total number of actions adds up, and that creates a different kind of tension. Instead of worrying about what's going to happen next, you're dealing with the idea that eventually something might go wrong if you're not careful. And that's why these long-term worlds feel impressive. It's not just the builds, it's the fact that they were built without dying. One of the most well-known examples of long-term hardcore play is Philza. His world lasted for years, not just in-game days, but real time. And during that time, he did everything you would expect from a long-term hardcore world. Built large structures, explored, progressed through the game, and essentially treated the world like a permanent survival save. What made this world important wasn't just how long it lasted, it was what it represented. It showed that hardcore didn't have to be short, high-risk challenge. It could be something you invest in over time. But at the time, it also showed the limitation of that idea, because eventually that world ended. And the way it ended wasn't because of something massive or dramatic, it was a situation that got out of control. And that's what makes it important. Even after years of experience, knowledge, and careful play, the risk never fully disappears, it just becomes less frequent. And when you're playing for that long, even rare risks can happen eventually. So that moment reinforces something about hardcore that still applies today. No matter how optimized you are, the game is never completely safe. If you look at modern hardcore players like well, me, you can see how all of these changes come together. These worlds are highly developed and highly optimized and very controlled. I know exactly what I'm doing at every stage. My early progression was efficient, my mid game was structured, and my late game is focused on expansion and large scale projects. And because of that, death becomes much less common. Not impossible, but rare enough that it's no longer the main focus. Like, yes, I'll pop a totem or two every once in a while, but it's super uncommon. Instead of worrying about survival constantly, I'm just thinking about what I want to build next, like what project I want to take on, or how I can push my world even further. But that doesn't mean the risk is gone, it just shows up differently. Instead of constant danger, it's moments where I get overconfident, or distracted, or I just push my limits. And those moments stand out because they are rare. So even though modern hardcore looks safer, it still carries that same underlying rule. One mistake still ends everything. Well guys, I think that's gonna about wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe, and comment down below if you want another form of video kind of similar to this, just on a different subject. Just let me know in the comments below. I always listen to feedback. I basically read every comment, so please comment. I love seeing comments. But yeah, again, hope you enjoyed. This video was so fun to make. I loved looking into the past of hardcore. But with that being said, I guess I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace.